So let's talk a bit about audio cables, and I'm not going to give a load of waffle about how some cables are sonically superior to others, or how certain cables which are treated with oxygen-free copper and cryogenically frozen for a full lunar cycle sound better. I really want to talk about what you actually need from an unbalanced RCA connector cable. And there are actually only a few requirements that need to be fulfilled for the cable to pass an audio signal without any sort of deterioration whatsoever in a normal environment. So these are what I would consider to be good audio cables, and we're going to have a look inside these to see what makes them good. And these are your typical very cheap cables that you wouldn't normally find for sale on their own. They'd usually come with some sort of CD player or amplifier, you know, just to tide you over until you got something new, which is what manufacturers expect nowadays. And then we're going to have a look at these. Now these are naughty audio cables because they look quite good and they seem to suggest that they would fulfill the requirements that I'm about to go into, but in reality they don't, and we'll find out why. So here's a freshly butchered audio cable. I'm not going to waste this. I'll stick some TRS connectors on the end of it. It can be RCA to TRS, he said, dropping the connector. And looking at this connector, the first thing you might notice is that it's not actually gold plated. It's almost certainly nickel plated, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with nickel plating. In fact, nickel plating is preferred for jacks in professional audio because it's so hard wearing. It's got excellent corrosion resistance as well. In fact, this cable that it's been cut off was in a shed for 4 or 5 years in some pretty damp conditions, and as you can see, it's looking pretty good. Another advantage of nickel plating as well is that it can actually be plated on quite thick because it's not too expensive, especially compared to gold, which means that it'll last quite a long time. So let's flip it over and have a look at the conductor. Now, one of the first things that you'll notice looking down there is that the actual conductors take up a very, very small amount of the cross-sectional area of the cable. In fact, probably due to marketing reasons, they've decided to make this insulation very, very thick. And of course, it's also cost effective as well because the insulation is very cheap compared to copper, and in fact this plastic itself is very cheap because it's probably got a lot of mineral filler in it. I estimate it's probably 70% ground calcium carbonate by weight. Very, very cheap. So let's take off this insulator and we'll have a look and see what's lurking underneath. After a considerable battle, I've managed to remove this insulation, and you can actually see that it's off-center, which doesn't help at all. So the first conductor here that we're going to look at is the ground return one, and I've actually pulled this away. It was wrapped around this foil here and twisted it so you can get an idea of how thick it is. It's not overly thick, but I wouldn't say it's too thin. If you start making this thinner, then the resistance will increase, and if you have any ground loop currents circulating around, then those voltage levels that they induce across the conductor will rise, and you'll start getting noticeable hums. So I'd say that's about right. What's more important though here is that we have this foil shield around the center conductor, because as you'll soon see, this copper conductor here is not able to fully shield the center conductor. And especially as this cable's unbalanced, then any electrostatically coupled interference will not be able to be rejected. It'll be just added straight onto our audio signal, which won't be nice at all. And this can occur through a variety of means. It could be on a mains cable with a bit of RF noise from switching power supplies on it. It could be from an adjacent USB cable, an HDMI cable, you name it. Probably the worst case of this would be from a small switching power supply like this one, because this DC cable here that comes out of it is actually connected via a 1 to 10 nanofarad capacitance to the fully rectified AC mains voltage, which will have quite a nice high frequency component on it, audio frequency, which will couple through quite effectively, and you'll end up with a very nasty, grating, metallic, sharp buzzing noise. Not nice. So taking off the foil, you can see our centre conductor, and you might be surprised at how thin it is, but this really isn't an issue, because it's important to note here that the impedance here is considerably higher than the impedance on the ground. And that's because the output impedance of the previous stage is effectively in parallel with the load impedance of the stage that it's connected to at this point. So the impedance here will be maybe 100 ohms to 1 kilo ohm at most, and the impedance here will be very low, less than an ohm. And so this conductor here is carrying a very small current. It doesn't have to be very large. And let's just have a look inside. There we go. Another wire stripping battle, and you can see if I just twist this here, oh, it's got wrapped up. There we go. Let's get that out of the way. Then it is considerably thinner, but that's absolutely no problem. What's important is that the ground conductor is no thinner than this. So I think this is a good cable, and it certainly fulfills all the requirements that I'll be looking for. It's got the foil, it's got a reasonably sized ground conductor, centre conductor doesn't matter, as far as I'm concerned anyway, and it's got a nice hard-wearing nickel plated finish. Lovely. So let's have a little look at a cable that would be on the decidedly lower end of the market. So here's our cheap, low-cost add-on cable that you might find in the bottom of your box once you purchase some hi-fi equipment. So taking the insulation off, there we go, we can see that we've got another multi-strand copper ground conductor, and that ground conductor is actually wrapped and twisted around the centre conductor, so it provides some shielding. And you might think that this is adequate, but unfortunately, once we start bending the cable, and this will actually happen inside the cable as well, once we start moving it around, that shielding copper wire very quickly moves out of the way, and you can see right here the centre conductor is now exposed, so it's going to be prone to electrostatic injection, which is not great. So if we just twist that round, we can compare that to our other cable and see if it's any thicker or thinner. And I think those are about the same to my eye. It may look different through the camera. And having a little look at the centre conductor, I'm going to guess that's also going to be thinner than the ground conductor. There's no problem with that. There we go. Yep, looks about right. So let's move on to our last one. Here's our cheap Pretender cable, and looking at it, you'll see that the connectors are gold plated. They've got these nice metallic surrounds on the connectors. It looks fairly decent, but I'm not quite sure what the words digital are implying here. Very odd. Anyway, looking at these connectors, they do appear to be gold plated, but if you look a little closer, I'm not sure if you'll see it through the camera, that's probably the best angle. They're actually tarnishing, and they're tarnishing by some sort of spotting erupting from the surface. And the reason for that is that in order to gold plate connectors, which might typically be made of brass or in some very cheap cases steel, then you need to apply a nickel layer. And if you don't apply that nickel layer, then the copper actually migrates to the surface and tarnishes it, which isn't great, as you can see. I've actually tried to scrape it back a bit, and there's actually no change in colour. Usually with gold-plated connectors, if you give them a little rub with a screwdriver, they'll suddenly take on quite a silvery hue, and that's due to the nickel plating underneath. But as you can see here, it just looks the same, which is pretty much confirmation that it's just brass underneath. I'm not actually going to butcher this cable because I've already got a piece of another one that I've cut off for wiring up something inside an old project ages and ages and ages ago. So you can see they're the same cable, you can see the writing's similar. Now looking at what's written on here, it says digital, fully shielded, high definition, PC, OFC, oxygen-free copper, doesn't matter, interconnect cable for home theatre and digital stereo hi-fi systems. Well, that's quite a lot to be written on a cable. Let's hope it lives up to that reputation. And I think you'll find that one or two of those things are quite frankly mistruths. So let's open it up and see what we're dealing with here. There we go. Off it comes. So you can see it's quite a thick insulator again, gives the impression of high quality. And we've got basically what we had with our previous very cheap cable. It's the same configuration. It's a, what's this, copper multi-strand ground return wire that's just twisted around this center conductor, so you're not going to get good electrostatic shielding if the cable's moved around a lot, or if you're close to, say, a switch mode power supply or any other source of electrostatic interference. And the center conductors also seems to be ever so slightly thinner. Maybe that's just me. I'm not sure. Too many cups of coffee anyway. And let's just take that off and see what's actually inside there. I highly doubt that this is oxygen-free copper, but seeing as I have no means to test it, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, I think that's about right. You've got a thick enough conductor for the ground, but not very good. Definitely not fully shielded. You need a foil to have fully shielded cable, and this certainly doesn't have it. So generally, I think these are still being sold. I've seen them on Amazon a few times. I would avoid these, and because they're no better than these. But if you can find something like this, then you're onto a winner, especially if you can pick it up cheaply. You know, cables like this don't have to cost lots of money. I think I bought these for about a £5 8 or so years ago. So there you have it. Get something like this, and don't be afraid to cut it open to see if there's foil inside.